I heard the scream before I opened the door, that high, breathy cry that I never expected to hear from her, at least not like this. The sound froze my hand on the knob for a second. Part of me wanted to turn away, pretend I hadn't come home early, pretend I hadn't heard anything at all. But my chest tightened, and I pushed forward. Her feet caught my eye first. Bare, slender, toes curled against a hardwood floor that wasn't ours. My mind registered every detail: the pale skin of her ankles, the slight tremor in her calves, the way her arches pressed into unfamiliar planks. Somewhere above her knees, a corner of a sheet draped across her body, twisting around another figure. And her scream, softer now, more of a startled gasp than a cry of pain, hung in the air. I felt the weight of my keys in my hand, realized I was gripping them so tightly that one of them cut into my palm. The sting brought me back to the moment. I stepped inside, numb, measuring the distance between me and them with an eerie calm that I didn't know I possessed. The door clicked shut behind me. There was no more screaming, only the sound of ragged breaths and a sudden thick silence. I didn't shout. I didn't break anything. I just stood there, watching my wife, Rachel, tangled in another man's arms. Sheets half off the bed, a toppled bedside lamp throwing weird shadows across the walls. I took in the smell of sweat and perfume and fear. She turned her head, eyes wide, something desperate and broken shining in them. "John," she said my name like it was both a question and an apology. The man with her, Mark, I knew of him, though never like this, was propped on an elbow, chest rising and falling. He had the nerve to look me in the face. I noticed his forearm, a tattoo of a knife and fork. I'd seen that tattoo once when I picked Rachel up from her class and shook his hand politely, never suspecting anything. Time slowed. My vision tunneled in on her eyes. They were frantic. She grabbed the sheet, tried to cover up, but the damage had already been done. She was bare, exposed, and part of me felt a cold bitterness at how beautiful she still looked, even in the middle of an act that shattered our life. I didn't lash out. There was no dramatic explosion of cursing. Inside, however, I could sense something break apart, like a quiet, methodical snap in my chest. "John," she whispered again, "it's not what it looks like." I almost laughed at that, but the chuckle died before it left my throat. My lips moved into something I might have once called a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Don't," I said, voice low and hoarse. "Don't insult me." She began to tremble. He sat up, tried to speak, but no words came. I let the keys slip from my fingers and thud onto the floor. The sound was sharp, final. I should leave, Mark finally managed, but I cut him off. "No," I answered quietly. "Neither of you should move." My heart was beating, sure, but there was an odd sense of control in me, like a surgeon preparing for a long, intricate operation, calm to the point of unsettling. I wanted to memorize every single detail: the softness in her jawline, the way her hair stuck to her damp forehead, the shame in her eyes, the shape of his torso next to her, how his breathing matched hers. I wanted it all burned into my brain, so that no excuse or half-truth would ever erase what I'd witnessed. She licked her lips, tried to speak, but the words got lost. We stared at each other in that suffocating quiet for what felt like an eternity. I forced myself to look away, to glance around the room. A small table in the corner, some half-eaten meal, 2 empty wine glasses, clothing scattered across the back of a chair. Her blouse, one I'd bought her last Christmas, crumpled on the floor like a discarded skin. My mind tracked the shape of it, how I remembered choosing it because it matched her eyes. Now it was just trash. I closed my eyes for half a second. In that darkness, I let the truth take root. My wife had shared a bed with another man, and I was standing there, heartbeat steady, not shouting, not crying. Instead, I felt the coldness coil inside me, a glacier that would never melt. She cleared her throat and whispered, "John, let me explain." He tried to stand, fumbling to pull on his pants. I took one step forward, and he froze. "Don't," I repeated, my voice lower this time. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you're not leaving until I'm done here." Neither of them moved. The hush after my words felt heavier than any scream. Rachel tried again. It was just, I. I looked at her. "Stop." She stopped. He stared at me, eyes flicking between the door and me. Maybe he was calculating if he could push past me. I guess I should have been afraid he might do something. He was bigger than me, younger, probably stronger. But I think he saw it in my face that there was no real fear left in me. And maybe that unnerved him more than any aggression would have. I walked closer to the bed. She flinched, clutching the sheet to her chest. Mark tensed, knuckles white on the edge of the mattress. I stopped just out of arm's reach, leaned forward slightly, and said, "Put your clothes on." They exchanged a glance, uncertain. Then, Rachel reached for her blouse, that Christmas gift I had once handed her, with a kiss and a smile. As she lifted it, I saw a tremor in her hands. My stomach lurched, but I kept my mask on. I turned around, stepping toward the small window that overlooked a street I didn't recognize. "When you're done," I said quietly, "we'll talk." She got dressed behind me, and I listened to every rustle of fabric, each small jingle of belt buckles, each uncertain breath. Then I heard them both stand. I could barely bring myself to face them. When I did, they looked disheveled, guilty, haunted. Rachel's eyes brimmed with tears she was fighting to hold back. Mark stared at the floor. I said, "Rachel, get in your car. Drive back home." She swallowed, voice shaking. "John, please." "Go," I repeated, still calm, the word cutting through the silence like a scalpel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. The tension was so thick I could taste iron on my tongue. She looked from me to him, then back to me. Home, I said again. I expected her to argue, but something about the absolute finality in my tone made her pick up her purse and slip on her shoes. She brushed past me, so close I could smell the faint trace of her perfume mixed with his sweat. It curdled something in my stomach. The door opened, and in a moment she was gone. Only Mark and I remained. He inhaled slowly, ran a hand through his hair. His voice cracked. "John, listen, man. I never—" "Shut up," I interrupted, turning to him fully. "I don't need your explanation." He opened his mouth, then closed it. A brief flicker of something, regret, fear, crossed his face. I wanted to hate him more, but all I felt was a cold, precise clarity. "I trusted her," I said evenly, "and she chose you. This isn't on you alone." He nodded as if he understood, but I doubted he truly did. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though it sounded more like a reflex than genuine remorse. I let the silence stretch, pinning him with my gaze. Finally, I spoke. "That's all. You can go." He stood there a moment longer, maybe expecting me to lunge at him, to scream, to break things. When I stayed rooted in place, showing no sign of motion, he reached for his jacket, walked to the door without another word, and left. The latch clicked, and I was alone in that room with the remnants of their betrayal. I looked around, took in the dirty plates, the bed still warm from their bodies, the faint indentation of her shape on the sheets. I picked up the wine bottle. It was empty. I placed it down on the table carefully, like a puzzle piece. Then, after what might have been seconds or minutes, I had no sense of time. I walked out, locked the door behind me, and returned to my car. At home, her car was in the driveway. I parked beside it, turned the ignition off, and stared at the steering wheel. My mind ran through every memory I had of us. The day we met, the ring on her finger, our fights, our laughter, all swirling in a silent torrent behind my eyes. Stepping inside felt surreal. I half expected her to hide, to cower in some corner. But she was in the kitchen, slumped at the table, face buried in her hands. She must have been sobbing, though her voice was muffled. I set my keys down. She lifted her head, eyes rimmed with red. She tried to speak, but nothing emerged. I moved to the sink, took a glass, filled it with water, and drank slowly. Each swallow felt like shards of glass sliding down my throat. My reflection in the window above the sink looked alien, blank, unreadable. John. She finally got the word out. I know you hate me. I put the glass down with controlled deliberation. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I don't feel much of anything right now. She opened her mouth again, but no immediate words came. Finally, she spoke in a trembling rush. It wasn't planned. It just happened. You've been away so often. I felt alone. I stared at her. Don't rationalize it. Tears welled up again in her eyes. It was a mistake, she whispered. I swear, I cut her off, my voice still unnervingly steady. It wasn't an accident. You made a choice. You took off your ring, took off your clothes, slept with him. That doesn't happen by mistake. She closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. I never wanted to lose you. I gave a short, humorless breath, halfway between a sigh and a laugh. You lost me the second you let him in. She blinked, swallowed hard. I love you, she said, voice cracking. That phrase, so simple, so hollow. I'd heard it from her lips 1,000 times before, and it used to fill me with warmth. Now it echoed like an empty promise. Don't say that, I told her. Not tonight. She cried silently, tears running down her face, hands trembling in her lap. I wanted to feel fury. I wanted to lash out, pound the walls, break a vase, do something to match the betrayal. But the only sensation I recognized was a cold hollowness, a sterile calm that refused to let me do anything impulsive. Eventually, I walked upstairs. She followed. In our bedroom, I took out a duffel bag and began dropping my things in it. She stood in the doorway, a silhouette with her hand pressed to her mouth, stifling her sobs. I could feel her gaze on me as I packed with methodical care, shirt by shirt, socks, pants. When she spoke, her voice was nearly gone. Where are you going? Away, I answered, zipping the bag close. I need time. She nodded, tears still streaking her cheeks, and stepped aside as I walked past. Downstairs, I grabbed my jacket. The whole house smelled of us, of a life built over so many years, now cracked open. She trailed after me, not touching, but hovering, like she wanted to cling but knew better. At the door, I paused, turned to face her. I'll call you, I said, though it felt like a lie. We'll talk about the details. She whispered something I couldn't make out. Maybe my name, maybe an apology. Then I left. For the next week, I stayed at a cheap motel on the edge of the city. Nothing fancy. A stained carpet, flickering lights, a bed that groaned with every movement. I spent most of my time staring at the wall or sitting on the curb outside watching traffic. I told my office I needed leave. They knew me well enough not to pry. My phone buzzed day and night. Text after text. Calls, voicemails. Mostly from her. Sometimes from our mutual friends. Once from Mark. I let them all go unanswered. In that bleak solitude, I replayed everything in my head. The day we got married under a warm Texan sun, my parents beaming, her in that simple white dress. Our nights cooking together. The feel of her hair slipping through my fingers. All those countless details that formed the mosaic of our marriage, now shattered. And with every memory, I imagined the scene. Her body pressed against his, the stolen whispers, the wine they drank to lower inhibitions. The only emotion that ever stirred me from the numbness was a low burn of resentment, coiling deeper each day. I felt it in my bones, a tightness that made me want to rip something apart, but I never let it surface. I strangled it with calm, because I had plans, even if I wasn't fully aware of them yet. After 2 more days, I finally answered my phone. "John," she said, her voice raw with relief. I've been going crazy. Please come home. We need to talk. I let a beat of silence pass. I'll come, I replied curtly, and ended the call. When I arrived, the house felt smaller, darker. She stood by the living room sofa, hands clasped in front of her, eyes swimming with guilt. She'd lost weight, or maybe it was just the tension pulling her face tight. I set my duffel on the floor. She swallowed hard and asked, "Do you want coffee? Food?" "No," I said, my tone as crisp as dead leaves. She nodded. "We can sit." "Fine." We sat on opposite ends of the couch. It reminded me of strangers waiting to see a lawyer. She twisted her fingers together. "I've been thinking about us, about everything that happened. I want to fix this, John. I know you don't believe me, but I want to try." My voice was steady, each word like a scalpel slice. "You want me to forget about it? Pretend it never happened?" She winced. "No, I know we can't just forget. But I'm willing to do anything to show you I regret it." I let the silence creep in again, observing how her eyes searched mine. Then, in a low voice, I said, "You regret it, or regret getting caught." She flinched. "That's not fair." "Fair left the equation when you invited him into our bed," I replied. Her lips trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice choking on the words. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to her. "So am I." We talked for hours. Or rather, she talked, and I listened. She tried to explain her loneliness, how our schedules barely overlapped, how she felt unappreciated. She insisted that Mark was a mistake, an impulse fueled by frustration, and an absurd sense of excitement. She said she'd do counseling, therapy, anything. I listened, stone-faced, feeling none of it seep through the ice in my veins. Eventually, she fell silent. The room held that hush again. I could hear her shallow breathing, see her chest rising and falling like she'd just run a marathon. "John," she ventured at last, "say something. Do you want a divorce?" The question lingered. Did I want a divorce? The rational side of me said yes. There was no going back, no resetting the clock. But another part of me, a more complex part, remembered the vow I'd made to protect and cherish her. The contradictory swirl made me feel sick. "I don't know yet," I answered, fully honest for the first time. "I know I can't just forgive you, but I also know we have a life together, a history." She lowered her head. "I'll do anything, John. Please, please just don't shut me out forever." Her tears were real. I could see that. But so was my anger, and it demanded to be fed. And that was when I decided I needed to see Mark. I needed to confront him in my own way. I told her, "We'll see a counselor, but I need space to do what I have to do." She wiped her eyes, relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she breathed. I didn't smile, didn't offer comfort. I simply said, "I'm staying here tonight." She nodded, a hint of hope flickering in her eyes. But I could feel that a chasm still gaped between us, and I had no intention of bridging it without taking my pound of flesh. Over the next days, I went through our house like a ghost. We occupied the same space, but we barely spoke beyond the essentials. She tried to show affection, placing a tentative hand on my shoulder or cooking my favorite meals. I let her attempts pass without reaction. Inside, I kept replaying that scene, her bare feet on someone else's floor. At night, I slept in the guest room. She'd come to the door, ask if we could talk, but I always waved her away. I had no interest in hashing it out again. Instead, I formed my plan. I discovered quickly that Mark was still teaching at the same cooking school. He was a rising star, known for his inventive techniques, with a local reputation building. I guessed it gave him confidence to take whatever he wanted, including my wife. One afternoon, after Rachel left for errands, I drove downtown. I knew from the school's website that Mark ran a late class on Thursdays. I parked across the street, waited until I saw the last students trickle out. Then I got out of my car, walked in. He was cleaning up the station, wearing his chef's coat, that stupid tattoo visible on his forearm. When he saw me, he stiffened. "John," he said, surprise evident. "Look, if you came here to—" "Relax," I interjected, stepping closer. "I just want to talk." He eyed me warily, but nodded, setting down the cloth he was using. "Okay." The kitchen was large, stainless steel surfaces shining under fluorescent lights. I could smell roasted herbs, garlic, maybe some saffron. My stomach turned. I walked around a table, keeping my distance. "Tell me why," I said, voice calm, barely above a murmur. "Why her?" He exhaled, shoulders slumping. I didn't plan any of it. She came to class. We talked. She was unhappy. I was drawn to her. It just happened. My jaw tightened, but outwardly I kept it together. "You think that excuses anything?" He shook his head. "No, I know it doesn't." I placed my palms on the edge of the table, felt the cool metal under my skin. "You ever think about how it would end? How it might ruin her life? My life?" He swallowed, adrift in guilt, or maybe fear. I didn't think at all. I believe that. Sometimes, I think people get carried away by lust and momentary gratification. They don't think until the consequences slam them in the face. "So what now?" I asked, letting the question dangle. His gaze flickered. "I don't want trouble. I'm sorry, John. I swear, I'll stay away from her." Something in me snapped at the mention of that vow. Like I needed him to say it, needed him to promise never to contaminate my world again. The calm layer cracked, if only for a second. I heard my voice tighten. "Dan right, you'll stay away." He watched me with uneasy eyes, as though expecting me to pounce. But I stepped back, swallowed that surge of anger, and forced my tone lower again. "I don't need you near us. If I ever see you again, I won't be so civil." He nodded, a jerk of the head. "You have my word." I lingered, letting the moment stretch, letting him feel the weight of my stare. Then I turned on my heel and headed for the exit. Behind me, I sensed him exhale in relief. The door swung shut, and I walked out into the cool evening air. My heart hammered in my chest, but I was proud of how controlled I'd stayed. That night, Rachel asked me where I'd been. "Went for a drive," I answered vaguely. She looked at me, concern and sadness in her eyes, but didn't push further. A week went by. We made an attempt at counseling. She found a couples therapist, scheduled an appointment, and I grudgingly went. I said little, arms folded, while she poured out her guilt and confusion. The counselor tried to guide us through emotional exercises. It all felt hollow. I watched Rachel's tears, saw her desperation, but some part of me was too far gone to respond. I think she sensed that. One night, as she served dinner, a slow-cooked roast that smelled of rosemary and longing, she finally burst. She flung down the serving spoon, tears streaming. "I can't live like this, John. I can't have you here physically but gone in every other way." I set my fork down with excruciating patience. "Did you think everything would go back to normal in just a few weeks?" She blinked through tears. "I don't know. I hoped we could at least start healing." Her words slid over me, and I stared at her, feeling that creeping anger swirl inside. "You want to heal," I said softly, "but you never considered the possibility that I might not be able to." Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. My voice found a sharper edge. "You broke us, Rachel. And now you expect me to plaster it back together because you feel guilty." She shook her head, choking on sobs. "I know it's my fault," she managed. "But I love you. I need you. Don't punish me forever." I felt something black, bitter, coil around my chest. "You think this is punishment?" I asked quietly. "No, this is me trying to stay sane." She buried her face in her hands. I stood, left my half-eaten meal, and walked away. Upstairs, I sank onto the bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling for hours. I recalled the details of that day, her bare legs entangled with his, the sheet pulled across her waist, Her lips parted in a gasp I'd never heard her make. It replayed in my head like a broken record. Sleep was impossible, so I got up, went into the garage. That's where I saw the boxes of old gifts, keepsakes from our early years, photos, letters, little trinkets we'd exchanged when times were good. I knelt there, rummaging, each memory pricking me like a needle. A letter she'd written me after we got engaged. A birthday card that read, "Love you forever." I felt my eyes burn, but no tears came. In a methodical daze, I gathered them all. The photos, the tokens, the souvenirs from a life now contaminated. I hauled them into the backyard, lit the fire pit. One by one, I dropped them in. The flames devoured each piece, bright orange tongues flickering in the night air. The smoke carried away the images of our once happy life. I watched them burn, heart pounding with a grim sense of satisfaction. Eventually, I heard the back door creak. She stood on the threshold, barefoot on the patio. "John," she breathed, voice trembling. "What are you doing?" I didn't turn. I tossed a stuffed toy she'd given me years ago into the blaze. The smell of melting fabric wafted up. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping forward. "Stop, please." My voice came out flat. "No." She reached out, but I shrugged her off. The reflection of fire danced in her tear-filled eyes. "Why?" she begged, desperation in her tone. I stared into the flames. "Because I need to. Because this is the only way I can breathe." She pressed her hands to her mouth, stifling a sob. "You're destroying everything." I glanced at her, and for a second I let the mask drop. "No," I said in a harsh whisper. "You destroyed it the second you invited him into your life. I'm just cleaning up the debris." She looked at me like I was a stranger. Then, with a strangled sob, she turned and ran back inside. I watched the last photo curl and blacken, an image of us smiling at some holiday event, consumed by hungry flames. My tears never came. I felt hollow, but also strangely light, as if part of me was being purged. When the fire died down, I stirred the ashes with a metal rod, scattering them to the night wind. In the days that followed, Rachel withdrew into a shell of silent remorse. She tried to apologize, to cling, to promise. I let her talk, but each time, I answered with a distant nod or a vacant stare. I slept in the guest room. I avoided her eyes. At work, people asked if I was okay. I lied, saying I was just a little under the weather. One afternoon, I found her upstairs, rummaging through her own things. Old diaries, clothes, wedding gifts. She looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "I was going to throw these out," she whispered, gesturing to the diaries. They were from happier times. They hurt too much now. I stared at her a moment. Then, in a quiet, measured voice, I asked, "Why are you still here?" She blinked in confusion. "Because I'm your wife." A bitter laugh pushed from my throat. "You sure you remember that?" She shrank back, tears welling. "You have every right to hate me, but I'm not giving up." I stepped closer, lowered my voice. "I don't hate you. That would mean caring. I'm trying to figure out if there's anything left of us worth saving, or if I should just end it." She swallowed, despair etched on her face. "Please, don't say that." I shook my head, turning away. My footsteps felt heavy on the stairs. Each day was an echo of that same emptiness. Weeks passed. We kept going to counseling, though it felt forced. I let her talk about her guilt, about how she wanted to rebuild trust. Meanwhile, I planned my final move, because I realized I couldn't live forever in that half-state of torment. Either we ended, or I had to find some twisted sense of closure. One evening, we had a long, draining session with the therapist. Rachel poured her heart out, weeping about her regret, how she'd do anything to prove her loyalty. I was silent most of the time. The therapist told us to consider a temporary separation. Rachel panicked at the suggestion, but I just nodded, as though I'd already decided. The next day, I said, "I'm leaving." She trembled, asked, "For how long?" "Don't know," I answered, packing the suitcase. She was in tears, following me around, begging for me to reconsider. I listened without expression, then walked to my car. She stood in the driveway, arms wrapped around herself, lips quivering. She looked so lost, yet I felt no urge to comfort her. I drove back to the motel, the same room I'd stayed in before. I let a few more days pass. Then I texted her, "Let's finalize. I'll see you tomorrow at the house." When I arrived, she was pacing the living room, looking pale and exhausted. The coffee table was stacked with papers, bank statements, property documents, all those practical details that come with unraveling a marriage. She turned as I entered, the swirl of her eyes betraying equal parts heartbreak and raw dread. I stepped up to the table, silently took inventory of the documents. "So," I murmured, "this is it." She bit her lip, voice trembling. "Is this really what you want?" I let the quiet stretch. "Part of me hates this," I confessed, "because I remember loving you. But I can't see a future where I forget what you've done. Every time I look at you, I see him." A choked sob escaped her. "I'm so sorry." I pressed my hand flat on the stack of papers, my calm returning that surreal composure. "I think this is the only way." She nodded, tears streaming silently now. My own face felt carved from stone. We began to sign. Pages turned. Pen strokes sealed the end of what once was everything. Halfway through, she dropped the pen. "Wait," she said, voice shaking. "Don't we owe ourselves one last chance to talk? To see if anything remains?" I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Does anything remain, Rachel?" I asked, softly. "Because I see only ashes." She took a step closer. Her breath hitched. Slowly, timidly, she reached for my hand. I let her fingers brush mine. "We built a life, John. 10 years. You can't tell me it's all gone." I felt that old warmth flicker somewhere deep inside me, a memory of how it felt to love her. But it was overshadowed by the memory of her betrayal. My voice came out hoarse. "Give me one reason to believe again." She squeezed my hand, her tears flowing freely. "Because I'll never, ever betray you again. Because I truly love you, and I know I took you for granted. I'll do whatever it takes. Move away, change jobs, anything." I stared at her, torn between the anger that had fueled me and the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage something. "It'll never be the same," I whispered. She nodded, tears dripping onto the papers. "I know. But can we build something new?" My mind reeled. The future was a dark corridor, uncertain, full of possible resentments. Yet the alternative was final severance. Was that truly what I wanted? I inhaled, searching for answers inside my own swirling mind. For a long time, I said nothing. She stood there, waiting, tears staining her cheeks, heartbreak carved into every line of her posture. The house was quiet. Finally, I set the pen down. I thought about the nights in the motel, the emptiness. I thought about the fire in the backyard, the ash that once was our shared joy. I thought about seeing them together, the absolute clarity of that betrayal. But I also remembered the life we shared before. Could I walk away without ever trying to see if that life could be reborn? I curled my fist, then released it. "We'll see," I said, words measured. "I'm not signing the rest of these yet." A flicker of hope brightened her gaze, but she held her breath, afraid to move. "Thank you," she whispered. I swallowed, unable to form a better response. I gathered the unsigned papers and put them in a drawer. Then, with a leaden heart, I walked upstairs. She followed me at a distance, uncertain. In our room, I paused. It felt both familiar and foreign. I remembered the last time I'd been in this bed with her, back before I knew, back when I trusted her completely. Now that seemed like another life. She stood behind me, close enough that I could feel the trembling of her body. "John, she began. I turned to face her, scanning her tear-streaked face, her parted lips. And in that moment I felt a surge of conflicting impulses. Anger, tenderness, betrayal, longing, all swirling together. My voice dropped to a ragged whisper. "Why now? Why do you think I should give you that chance?" Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to answer. "Because I'm still yours. Because every breath I take reminds me of what I threw away. And I promise, John, I promise I'll spend every day proving that you mean everything to me." I wanted to push her away, to remind her that I might never forgive. But something in her eyes, in the rawness of her tears, held me captive. I reached out a hand, brushed the back of my fingers along her cheek. She closed her eyes, leaning into my touch as though it was the only warmth in a frozen world. And for the first time since that day, I felt a single tear slip down my own cheek. It startled me, that hot droplet of emotion I'd buried for so long. She opened her eyes, saw the tear, and let out a small, shuddering sob. In that moment, I let my hand drop. "I can't promise you I'll ever forget," I whispered. "But maybe we can try to move forward. If you ever give me reason to doubt again, I swear I'll walk out that door and never look back." She nodded vigorously, tears catching on her lashes. "I understand." We stood there, two strangers who used to be lovers, who once believed in forever. The silence was heavy, but not quite suffocating. Slowly, she reached for my hand again. This time, I intertwined my fingers with hers. We both felt how fragile that connection was, how easily it could shatter. She led me to the bed. At first, I froze inside, haunted by images of her with Mark, the very concept of touching her overshadowed by that memory of betrayal. But as she slipped her arms around my waist, I sensed her trembling. A rush of emotions, pain, regret, a lingering flicker of love, washed over me, making my breath catch. When she leaned in, pressed her lips gently to my cheek, I didn't pull away. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a return to what we were. It was more like an exhausted acceptance, a weary step into a new battlefield. She whispered broken confessions, her voice trembling against my ear, telling me how she hated herself for hurting me, how she'd been lonely and reckless and lost. I said nothing, just let her words flow. My arms encircled her, out of reflex or memory, and I could feel her heartbeat wild against my chest. That night, we shared the bed, lying side by side in silence. She tried to hold my hand, and I let her. I listened to her breathing. She fell asleep eventually, tear tracks drying on her face. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind racing with questions about the future. The next morning, I got up early. She was still asleep. I walked downstairs, made coffee, sat at the table, and tried to envision the path ahead. Divorce papers half signed in the drawer upstairs. A wife who betrayed me, now wanting to mend the unmendable. A swirl of memories I couldn't banish. And I wondered if real forgiveness was even possible, or if we were doomed to a half-life of resentment and forced smiles. She appeared in the doorway, hair rumpled, eyes puffy. "Morning," she whispered. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Her gaze hovered on me, looking for any sign of affection or condemnation. "I'll make breakfast," she offered softly. I shrugged, not trusting my voice yet. She moved to the kitchen, began gathering pans and ingredients. The smell of eggs and bacon soon filled the air, stirring an odd sense of familiarity and heartbreak in me. We ate in near silence, except for the clink of forks on plates. But every so often, our eyes met, and we each tried to read the other's thoughts. After we finished, she cleared the dishes, her movements careful, as if one misstep might break the fragile peace. I glanced at the living room, where a half-burned candle and a photograph still remained on a shelf. Some silly snapshot of us from years ago, both smiling like kids. The edges of that memory felt razor-sharp, capable of cutting me to the quick. She returned, hands wringing in front of her apron. "So, what do we do now?" I tapped my fingers on the table, thinking of the day I walked into that room, saw her with him. My voice came out quiet, but steady. "We try," I said, "until one of us can't anymore." Her eyes brimmed, but she nodded. "I'll give you everything I have," she whispered, and so began our uneasy truce. We scheduled more counseling, attended sessions where she bared her guilt, and I wrestled with my sense of betrayal. The counselor spoke of time, of honesty, of rebuilding trust from the ground up if we both truly wanted it. Rachel was the model of contrition, a relentless wave of apologies and devotion. Sometimes I believed her sincerity. Sometimes I suspected she was just terrified of losing me. The days turned into weeks, then months. We had moments that were almost normal, where we laughed, or planned a meal, or watched a movie together. But then a small reminder would creep in, a moment of suspicion or an unexpected wave of bitterness. I'd freeze up, and she'd grow silent, tears close to the surface. I never once used the phrase, "I forgive you," because I wasn't sure it was true. Yet in that strange, cold way, I was forging a new kind of existence with her. I took the divorce papers from the drawer once, stared at them, remembering how I'd almost signed away our life. But then I shoved them back in and closed it, because, for reasons I couldn't articulate, I wasn't ready to let it end. She asked once if I still loved her. I couldn't answer. The best I could manage was, "I want to," which made her cry harder than any harsh words I'd spoken before. Time wore on, and Mark's name never came up again. She promised she had no contact with him, and I believed it, for the most part. On nights when the ghosts of that betrayal still haunted me, I'd get dressed, go for a walk, and come back to find her sitting up, hugging her knees, worried I might not return. Each time, I did return, still wearing the face of that stoic, wounded man. Gradually, some of my numbness thawed. A reluctant warmth seeped into me during shared dinners, small smiles. We made halting attempts at physical closeness, each time overshadowed by the memory of how I'd first discovered her with someone else. Yet bit by bit, we navigated that minefield, acknowledging that we could never be who we were, but maybe we could be something different. It was never a storybook reconciliation, never a swift sweep of forgiveness. It was painful, ugly, and slow, but it was real. She'd ask about my day. I'd answer more than a single sentence. We'd talk about old friends, tentatively plan a weekend away, or share a glass of wine. And in those moments, a fragile sense of togetherness would flicker, reminding me why I once believed in us. But I still had nightmares, nights when I'd dream of that scream, her bare feet on that foreign floor, the sheet twisted around him. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, and stare at her sleeping form in the darkness. Sometimes, I'd slip out of bed, pace the hallway, my head echoing with doubts. In the morning, I'd show up to breakfast distant and cold. She never complained. She tried to be patient, to understand that her betrayal itched scars I might never erase. And so we continued, a day at a time. Months passed, and the broken pieces of our marriage rearranged themselves into something raw but functional. I remained calm, methodical, like a surgeon meticulously stitching a wound that might never fully heal. She quietly dedicated herself to proving she was faithful. No more secrets, no more flirtations, no more hidden texts. She gave me access to everything: phone, emails, diaries, if I wanted it. Sometimes I'd look. Sometimes I'd wave it off. Trust was a currency slowly re-earned, not demanded. One evening, over dinner, she finally gathered the courage to ask the question again. "Do you still want a divorce?" I pushed my plate aside, gazed into her eyes, and searched for any hint of deception. Saw only sincerity, fear, and a glimmer of hope. Slowly, I shook my head. "No," I answered. "Not tonight." She released a breath, tears gathering. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded, turning to stare out the window. Our backyard was quiet, the fire pit cold, the memory of burn tokens distant but still there, a silent testament to how thoroughly I'd wanted to erase our past. Now, ironically, we were rebuilding something on top of that scorched ground. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "We'll get through this," she said softly, voice trembling. I closed my eyes, letting her warmth seep into my skin. "Maybe," I conceded. In that small concession lay a new seed of possibility. Neither of us knew if it would grow into a second chance or wither under the weight of our history, but we tended to it, day by uncertain day. Sometimes I replay that day in my mind. The scream, the hush that followed. How I stood there watching them in that bed, strangely calm. People ask if I regret not screaming, not smashing things, not storming out for good. But in truth, that cold, surgical detachment was my armor, my way of surviving a betrayal so profound it nearly destroyed me. I suspect if I'd let rage consume me, I wouldn't be sitting here now, hearing her breathing in the next room, feeling the fragile weight of a life we're still trying to piece together. I'm not sure I'll ever forgive her entirely. But I'm still here, and so is she. Our story continues, shaped by choices that can't be undone. I learned that vengeance, that scorching fury, can bring a momentary catharsis. But afterward, all you're left with is ash and emptiness. And if there's even a faint spark of something left worth saving, maybe it's better to try, to see if a new, hard-won love can emerge from the wreckage. Each day, I decide again whether to keep trying. So far I have. Maybe tomorrow I won't. But as long as she's still fighting for us, and as long as I can look at her without seeing only a stranger's touch, I'll keep my heart from freezing over. That doesn't make me a saint. It just makes me a man who once believed in forever, who lost that belief in the space of a single afternoon, and who's now searching piece by piece to see if it can ever be found again.